everybody to this meeting of the Powys Pension Board this morning. Meeting at a time when there's lots going on in the LGPS world. I think the first item is apologies, and I received apologies from Dave Powell, who's unable to join us this morning, but he has submitted some written comments, which I'll refer to as we get to the relevant items. I believe there may be another member absent, but may be joining us later. Is that right, Rachel?
Hopefully Debbie Jones will be joining us later, Chair. Yes.
Okay, we'll hopefully that Debbie will join us. We'll carry on in her absence as we are quorate. And declarations of interest, other than membership of pension funds, which perhaps goes without saying. I don't think there's anything on the agenda, but anyone have anything to declare? No, all quiet. We'll move on with nothing declared. The minutes of the last board meeting. That's was the 2nd of September, would anyone?
Shall I share my screen, Chair? Would that be helpful for everybody?
Yeah, great. Yeah.
I don't know.
Thanks, Chris.
That's come through now, is it? Can you see?
Yeah, that's helpful. We're all on the same page now. So, yeah, first, would anybody wish to suggest they're a proper record, and that I should sign them as a correct record of that meeting?
I don't think I can do that as board secretary, Dev. I think we just need a.
Yeah, so Graham or Ian?
Yeah, can do, Ian, no problem.
Okay. Not sure who that was.
That was
That
Ian.
was Ian.
Thanks, Ian.
That's Ian. Thanks, Ian. Yeah. And well, can I second that from the chair, presumably?
It looks as though Graham might be having some issues, actually. If I
Yeah.
you see him nodding. Yeah. So give a thumbs up, maybe great. In the meantime, yeah, there we are.
So he's on the call, is he?
Graham's on the call, but I think he's having issues coming off mute.
Yeah.
But he gave me the thumbs up then, so I think both Ian and Graham are happy with those minutes.
Both happy with it. So matters arising from my perspective, I think there's several issues on there which have developed since then and are on the agenda again. So rather than raising them from the minutes, I think we take them from the as they arise on the agenda. There were one or two, I think, action points on there, Chris, or?
I don't think they are actually, Chair.
No, I think they were on the committee meeting minutes rather than ours.
Yeah.
So unless Ian or Graham chips in with wanting to raise anything arising on the minutes, we'll move on and raise those other matters when we get to them on the agenda.
Yeah, happy to move on.
Thanks, you. Right. The minutes of the Pensions Committee, there have been two Pensions Committee meetings. There was a regular meeting held on 7th of October, which was the first time I joined that committee. was a good meeting and lots of stuff going on there. So perhaps we can again have a look. Chris is taking us through those. They looked at the risk register and took on our comments there, I think.
Yeah.
And likewise, things like the TPR code of practice, we'd covered that, and the committee took on the same issues.
Yeah, committee find it really helpful knowing that the board have done the deeper dive into the detail of it. It really helps the meeting from the committee side of things flow, because they haven't got to spend time going into as much detail. So yeah, they are grateful.
They had a update on WPP, which we got on our agenda today.
Yeah.
And,
data quality is covered as part of my later item as well when it comes to the legislation update. So pick that one up.
good. Thanks, Chris. And communications we'd covered as well for last meeting. The annual report is again on today's agenda, albeit we've seen it before. Yeah, we had a bit of a discussion on responsible investment. I think that's a live issue at the moment, with the committee are going through a process of identifying their investment beliefs and in a questionnaire with Aon as our consultants, and that sort of topic of responsible investment will be progressed over the next few months, I think. And there was the sort of current topic of, other than the environmental aspect, which some members have great interest in, the topic of Israel and the conflict in the Middle East was also mentioned. I think from a fund perspective, in that context, we've got to refer to the Scheme Advisory Board's statement on fiduciary duty, and we've got to be always acting in the best interests of scheme members, which is the employers and the staff and pensioners, of course. But that's fiduciary duty is primarily the responsibility for the financial best interests of those. And with things like the Middle East conflict with Palestine, which terrible things are going on there, it's very difficult to knee-jerk in the short term with those things. In the longer term, we can influence, and certainly through engagements, but it's very difficult to disinvest from relevant stocks, because you never know where to draw the line on such things. Yeah, we did have a discussion at the committee on those topics, and I think they're taking their responsibility in that particular aspect very, very seriously, although it's a sort of work in progress.
Yeah, I'd agree that supports my recollection of the discussion as well. Obviously, there's some responsible investment training being put on by the WPP later in the month, and we're looking at putting on an additional, or one of the responsible investment committee meetings in January or February time as well. So it's once we've got that date, I'll share it with you, Chair, so you're aware of that as well.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, we've got the date of the WPP responsible investment. We'll get to that later, but our own dates would be nice to confirm that. Yeah. And the committee extended Aon's contract, which was the only pragmatic way forward in the current valuation year context, and we'll mention a training day on valuation later in the agenda as well.
Yep.
Can I check whether my sound is working now?
Cheers, Graham. Can hear you. Yeah. Well done.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Graham. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr.
Okay, so that was the first routine meeting of the committee, which I attended, and it was a good meeting. There was another additional hastily arranged additional meeting on the 22nd of October. The draft minutes of that are on page 21 and 22. I think just to, I'm sure Graham is probably cited on this already, but just to go through that particular meeting was specific for one item, and that's in that the report from Aon explained that additional senior posts are required in pensions admin, and that's to improve resilience and compliance due to the increasing demands and expected legislative changes to ensure that the team and associated staff are not overwhelmed with pressure of change. Those are Aon's words rather than mine. And of course, our concern as a board should be to seek assurance that our scheme manager does have sufficient resources to ensure effective administration and staff well-being. Although, of course, we do appreciate that the optics of additional posts can be sensitive for both elected members and council officers at this point in time, with budget cuts and the council tax increase under pressure. So at the time, committee members queried how staff resources were funded, and my comments to the committee did state that financing the additional staff resources should not be an insurmountable issue, as the pension fund is separate from the council's general fund, hence not subject to the constraints currently faced by other services. And whilst we're acutely aware of perceptions allowing additional resources to strengthen the pension section in the context of budget pressures elsewhere in the council, it's clear that the pension fund is separately funded. So this won't increase the council tax or reduce resources available for other council services. On this point, David Powell did provide comments on the draft minutes, and he was chiming with my comments really, and he said I would welcome my comments about resourcing, and as the council's ex-section 151 officer and the former lead on the pension fund, David welcomed the committee's approval of the recommendations proposed by Aon to strengthen the pension section resource. And Aon's reasons are sound around compliance, and at the time of change, the team needs to be resilient. And David continued saying, it's important to stress that the associated costs do not fall on the council's general fund and are outside of the council's overall budget setting process leading to council tax setting. Therefore, increasing the resilience of a relatively small team will not be at a cost to other council services. So I think that was also the line which Jane, as existing section 151, had given the committee members. So I think we're entirely in accord on that, Chris. And I think the committee were pretty much unanimous in moving forward in this direction.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, there's a discussion around funding, which you've covered already, Chair. But from a board perspective, the reassurance that the team is plugging any gaps that are identified as part of this resource review. Bit of context was that there's been so much change in the LGPS over the past 5-10 years that it's been increasingly difficult for the existing resources to be able to manage the expectations placed on us. Pension boards come into existence, for example, is something that wasn't there before. We now have at least 4 meetings a year, which need to be prepared for. So it's just been a trend that the expectations on pension funds is increasing and is likely to continue increasing. And Aon did some work for us just to address our resourcing and compare us to other funds and how resourced we are compared to other funds that they've had this experience with, and they made some recommendations which committee thankfully approved on the back of the recommendations and the conversations they had with Jane as Section 151 officer, and also as David as chair of the board, able to feed into these discussions as well. So yes, we're in process now of working through the system to try and get these positions created. But maybe I should just point out that these are not looking at caseloads. This is not a case of processing the administration side of things. These posts are the framework around that. So systems and governance, those employer, those sorts of posts, really areas where it was perhaps we needed strengthening, and Aon have identified that.
Yeah, and we did carry out some of our own comparisons with other LGPS funds in Wales, as well as Aon's comparison across their client base as well.
Yeah,
I've been in touch with Gwynedd and Clwyd and Swansea, etc., to get comparisons, and we really did need to strengthen things like, as Chris says, governance, communication, and the like. Systems, so that's hopefully we'll move ahead at pace.
that's the plan. Yeah.
Graham or Ian, any comments on that meeting?
No, nothing to add really. I think it's a needed approach, isn't it? And as David said, it's a sensible approach around the additional, because it's clearly needed.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, we'll note those and move to the next item, which is it your admin update, Chris?
It is, David. Yeah, it is. That's the first one with me driving the report, really. You happy for me to continue, Chair? Pick this one up.
Yes, I'm just a bit confused.
Let's scroll back up to the agenda. Have we missed anything? Let's just double check.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
We have. So verbal update on the regulators code of practice.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering, Chris. I was
apologies. Yeah.
rambling back on the. There's no paper on it, is there? So
no, usually there is a paper, which has confused me as well. So this is just to give board some assurances around the new regulators code of practice. We're 6 months into it already, believe it or not. We've carried out the initial run through all the questions. So we've done a high level assessment against the new requirements within the code. At the last meeting, you saw me produce a high level report, which showed you some of the sort of the RAG status and how it worked with the bar charts and whatnot. So the intention is for us to dive into that in a bit more detail. And the reason behind that is because there's more expectation placed on it this time, where we were able to almost answer a yes question. Have you got a policy in place for X? You could say yes, it's on the website. The regulator's expecting a little bit more detail, or a significant more amount of detail to support that now. So we have to put a lot more into our evidence-based approach. And if we're referencing a specific part within a document, for example, if an overpayment example is a policy is a good example. If one of the questions asks, do you have an approach to X? We have to say, yes, it's in the overpayment policy under section 2, which is hyperlinked here. And that's giving that another level of detail that should the regulator come in and have a look at the policy, they can see exactly what we're looking at. But also it provides a bit of resilience, I guess. If I wasn't around, it's all well and good to say, yes, I know it's in the overpayment policy, but somebody else could step into my shoes and say, okay, so it's actually in the overpayment policy under section 2.1, for example. So we carried out the high level assessment. We need to go into that sort of level of details to provide our evidence to support those comments as well. So because of all the good work that we've done over the recent years with the board, we're actually in a pretty good place when it comes to the new code. But there is some additional work around, let's say, this evidencing that we need to do. So board might remember at the last meeting, I think Graham suggested that maybe we just have a bit of an ad hoc meeting, maybe to work through one of the modules. You might remember I presented hexagons on the screen, and behind those hexagons there's lots of questions that perhaps we just call a short, snappy meeting just to work through one of the modules. One, to give board the understanding of the sort of questions that the module and the detail the module goes into, but also demonstrate compliance to the regulator as well. If the regulator sees that board is sitting down and working through this with the officers, I think it just provides that additional level of assurance to the regulator too. So my intention was, after this meeting, providing board were happy with that, was that I go and speak to Rachel and we have a look at calendars and try and slot in an additional shorter meeting just to look at maybe one of the items on the new code of practice tool, providing board are happy with that. So that was really my comments under this item, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions or go into any more detail if needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was our direction last time and still the intention. So very happy to take it forward on that basis. And there's been lots happening in your world since September. So fully understood that we haven't had that discussion to date, and it'll be something we'll hopefully get onto in the next few months, really, after Christmas probably by now. But
Yeah, most likely. I think we're probably looking after Christmas now, to be honest. Yeah. Hopefully that's okay with. I'm conscious of people's time and everything, that we're all very busy. So the intention would be to be a short and snappy meeting, really focusing on one specific area, if that's okay.
Yeah, and if we were to get the additional resource in to produce these things, then of course it will be much easier on yourself, Chris.
Yeah. Yes, it's been spread across all these different sort of areas of pension funds that are proving quite challenging. So yes, the intention would be that when we do get this additional resource, and they would spend a lot more of their time focusing on this sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody happy? We'll move on to where we almost got to a moment ago with the admin update.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Again, this is just one of the standing items that we've been bringing forward over recent years. Covers the cash flows over the last quarter and some high-level membership statistics in terms of how the membership is pretty constant, slight increase. And it is, as you will see at every meeting, I tend to bring the membership detail to you. It's always going up. It very rarely goes down. So again, that's a positive trend. Our membership is growing, although granted, in this last quarter, pretty small numbers, to be honest. But I just want to scroll back up to the cash flow section because I'm aware that David had some comments, Chair, I think, around the cash flow.
I'm trying to find those now. Yeah, David's comments. He would welcome any comments on cash flow, given the quarter shows an increasing gap, albeit one skewed by transfers and lump sums. And he does put a caveat on that. Clearly, that's not the whole picture, as the issue of investment performance, that's investment returns probably, is outside of the figures on page 23. And he's just seeking a point of assurance on this, really.
Absolutely, yeah, he's right. This is literally focusing on the administration high-level numbers. This does not include any of the investment or governance related income and outgoing. So it's literally just the administration. But it does paint the picture that more is going out than is coming in when you just look at these two items. And so it's important to be aware that the fund is in a cash flow positive place but it is reliant on its investment income to make it that way as well. So that's not uncommon for the LGPS. Lots of LGPS funds are maturing, and in fact, some funds have tipped over into a cash flow negative position, so they need to adjust their investment strategy to offset that. But talking about cash flow, committee recently approved a cash flow matching exercise. So they're acutely aware that the position of the fund in terms of being cash flow negative positive. So they've implemented a new strategy to do some cash flow modelling over the next 10 to 15 years. So basically just tweaked the strategy just to be aware of this issue so that we have a policy in place to be able to move quickly should we need to. So hopefully that's given board some assurance that we're aware this is only part of the picture, but the committee have looked at this from the more holistic approach and taken out a policy to model the cash flow.
Indeed, and they did cover that in the regular meeting at the beginning of October. and they identified the cash flow, and we did discuss asset allocation, which I think Kenneth from Aon said we would be reviewing as a fund during the first quarter of next calendar year, perhaps.
Yes.
And of course, that would be in anticipation of the triennial valuation,
Correct.
but also cognizant of the cash flow, and the asset allocation may need to be skewed perhaps more to income generating assets rather than growth assets to a degree.
Yes.
So that's quite a complex calculation by our actuary and advisor to advisors, where to go on that. I look forward to that conversation with them, as it's one of those areas which we really do rely on their expertise and number crunching on, really.
Absolutely. And we'll come on to the training session a bit later on, but there's the training session, and I've given them the brief that we need to be looking at things like the discount rate in a bit more detail as part of this training session as well. So hopefully that'll be useful.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, notes David's comments and Chris's explanation, and the context of investment returns, as well as or investment income, as well as in and outgoings in cash from scheme members, etc. So
yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, that's a pretty routine report, Chris. Thanks.
It is. It is. I say we have been bringing this for some time, so I am happy to tweak if board see fit, as hopefully find it useful in terms of a snapshot of the last quarter. But so it's been a long-standing item. So if we do think it's time to refresh it or change it at all, then please do let me know. But I'll continue bringing it until advised otherwise.
Yeah, clearly it's providing some assurance to David Powell. So
yes,
we'll retain for the time being, please.
Okay, fine.
And yeah, again, in board secretary hat, legislation and guidance update, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Where
Now,
do you start on this?
I know there could be quite a conversation around this one, couldn't it? Right, okay. Perhaps we pick it up as we go then in the bullet points, Chair, if that's okay. Essentially, what this report tries to do, it tries to bring together in a concise way the legislation changes and the governance changes that the LGPS is going through. So if we just start with the big one, which is 2.2 really, which is the pensions review. So since coming into power in after the last general election, the government have had a strong view on the pensions industry within the UK, and it's quite clear that they want to have a look at it and change the way that some of it works in terms of growth. Obviously, the big thing in their manifesto is growth in the UK economy, and they see pensions as a way to help them achieve that. So on the 4th of September, they published a call for evidence, which is hyperlinked within 2.2, and they asked for views from the pensions industry, to which we replied, and I'll share the response with you after the event. I didn't include it in the pack because I'm not sure it's been made public yet. It will in turn, but I'll share it around board after this meeting, so you've got a sight of what we said. But essentially, the funds in Wales and the Wales Pension Partnership replied to this call for evidence from the government, and staking a claim really as to why we feel as though the Wales Pension Partnership and the LGPS in Wales works well. And I think the evidence speaks for itself in terms of how much we've got pooled and progress we've made since the WPP has come into existence. So we put all that into black and white, submitted it ahead of the deadline, and the government obviously took some of it on board. Since then, we've had the budget. And also, more recent to that, last Thursday night, the Chancellor held her Mansion House speech, which I think is probably the one that we should probably spend most time focusing on, because in there, even though it's quite high level in terms of her actual speech, what she said about the LGPS, she literally touched that in her speech. They did launch a consultation after the event, which is a 9-week consultation on pooling. So where do I start with that one then? Right, okay. So essentially what that consultation is looking at is investments on pooling within the UK. there's 8 pools at the minute, and it's quite clear. You might have seen the term mega funds mentioned in the press in the last week or so. And that's looking at these big, really big investment vehicles that seek to get bigger returns and lower fees, etc. And I think she actually mentioned, I think the Canadian model and the Australian model in her speech, which are these mega funds, as they call them. I think the thinking behind those is that perhaps not all the pools that are out there in the LGPS actually meet the criteria she's thinking of for these mega funds, which might be a certain size. So they're looking at what they might be able to do to try and consolidate, maybe merge some of these pools to get them up to a bigger scale. So the main things that came out of that consultation, just refer to my notes here, were a couple of things at a high level, really. One was the main one, really, is that they're looking to try and pool all assets within the LGPS by the 31st of March 2026. That's obviously not very far away. We're looking at just over 12 months, really, 15, 16 months to try and pool all the existing assets that are sat outside any pooling vehicles. Now, we're at about 70% pooled, which is not bad going. I think if you look across Wales, some pools are further advanced. Some are in the 80s, some in the 70s, and I think we're 69, 70%, something like that. So you can see there's an obvious challenge to try and get that remaining 30% across to the pool by the 31st of March 2026. And what it tends to be for those assets that have not been pooled yet is it's the long-term ones, things like investments in property, real estate. These can have long-term investment periods, the timelines. Yet we're now being told we need to bring this across by the 31st of March 2026. Now, there could be a problem there because you might not be able to get out of some of these investments, or if you do, there'll be a cost attached to it. So we're going to have to try and work out how we achieve this intention to get things across by the 31st of March 2026. Now, I think our response in our to the consultation will be along those lines of, hang on, this is going to be quite tricky because of the nature of some of these investments. But for some, it will be easier than others. I say some are already in the mid-80s in terms of pooling. But what the remaining assets that haven't been pooled are probably these long-term ones, as we see at Powys. So we've got about 30% we need to try and get across, set across various different asset classes, hedge funds, property, private equity. And part of the reason for those still being outside the pool, and I'm not just speaking for us, was because the sub-funds weren't necessarily available within WPP. They've only just launched the real estate, the property sub-funds, for example. So it's still early days in terms of the pooling vehicle being there for property. So quite a bit to do in terms of timescales and pooling. Any comments on that one, Chair, before we move on, or do you want me to carry on and we'll come circle back to it?
Yeah, well, quite a lot of comments on that, Chris, if I can perhaps take some time on this one, because the Mansion House speech is very recent. She was only speaking, Rachel Reeves, on Thursday night, and it's too early to jump sideways on this now. But the possibility of a mega pool means, I mean, it's going to be more difficult for some than others. But I think first thing is it's all about investments. And I think we know now that all 86 LGPS funds, including Powys, will continue to exist without a forced merger of LGPS funds. So that's the first sigh of relief, perhaps.
Yes.
Looking at huge transitions at fund level. But as you say, that the two challenges are, do the existing LGPS pools, WPP in our instance, meet the government's new stricter definition of what the government considers to be a correct structure for a pool? And the second pillar is the tougher deadline for pooling all assets, as you said, by March 26.
Yeah.
Those two requirements seem to sort of putting both together. If we have to have a change to the pool as well as pooling all assets within a very tight deadline, it looks beyond challenging, really. And I'm sure several funds and pools will point out the practicalities of that in response to the current consultation. The strict definition of a pool now is having, or what's proposed is an FCA regulated fund operator. We have that, but it's external, and the government say now they require all pools to be FCA regulated investment management companies, which WPP isn't. We've got our externalized regulated fund operator. So they're pushing for internal investment management capability, not WPP's outsourced model. And there's a high bar for reconfiguring to that, which on face value would mean you'd look to WPP having to merge with one of the other pools, which is the same perhaps for Access and Northern pools who don't meet the proposed configuration. That said, there is explicit reference to Wales in the pooling consultation documents, which means that WPP might not be forced to merge with another pool. And the government's wording is that they've considered whether any additional reforms are needed to the existing pools to redraw them along regional lines. And they recognise there are other factors at play other than pool size. And in particular, they refer to the Wales Pension Partnership operating within a devolved nation. And our response, Chris, to the call for evidence mentioned that the different regulations in Wales, different audit regime, the language, etc. And the government say it may therefore make sense for Wales LGBS funds to continue in a separate pool. So we'll need, or WPP will need to look at that very carefully and seek clarification. So it's much too early for us this morning to jump sideways on that one. But if WPP would have to merge, then WPP setting up additional investment vehicles for us might be difficult in the timescale.
Yeah.
And we don't know what any prospective partner might already have as a menu of options for us. So yeah, we'll have to take each step as it comes. But as you say, the funds in Wales, 7 of the 8 are around the 70–80% funded, and we might have challenges with the hedge funds. I think property is on the way to being, the real estate is on the way to being pulled, so that's less a problem for us.
We have some existing relationships with the property managers at the pool as well, so whether that might help in terms of transition as well, I don't know, but
yeah, so that one, but hedge funds and bonds we might have to discuss with the pool to see how we can move forward on those to get them pulled. On private equity, I think that's going to be a problem for every LGBS fund. Yeah, because the transitional cost of getting those pooled, the existing legacy investments, is going to be prohibitive for everybody, I think. And they're not, by their very nature, they're private equity and not traded on the market. So
exactly, yeah.
We've got challenges, but others have as well. And it's quite ironic, really, that the major intention of the government is to look to get additional investment in UK, and particularly in private equity and infrastructure. But those funds who have already made such investments are going to have great difficulty in pooling those legacy investments. So it's yeah, some irony there. But as we said, I think.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah.
Sorry, just to finish, Chris. We've got the risk register investment pillar as a subsequent item. I think we should probably at that point put this
I think
in
you're
as
right.
an additional risk. But it's not one which we can run away with at the moment. It needs a lot more clarification, and it's still an ongoing consultation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hot off the press, really. Those are the two big headline takeaways in terms of the potential impact on us. There's obviously a lot more in the consultation as well, which we'll respond to in due course. So in terms of next steps, I'll pull together a draft response to the consultation points, obviously, share with board for comment and share with committee for comment ahead of the, I think it's a 9-week consultation. I can't remember the deadline off the top of my head, but we have about 9 weeks to submit the response. So that's the next steps. We'll get that written, circulated, and agreed.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know, Ian and Graham, anything to add? We've spoken at length on that particular aspect, Chris and myself.
No, nothing at this time.
Same here. I think as it been a very recent sort of announcement, it's it's taking it all in, isn't it? And I'm sure once a response is put together, then we'll have sight of it, won't we? And comment as part of the process, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Notice Debbie's joined as well now. So
Oh, welcome, Debbie.
Well, Debbie.
Sorry, I had an absolute nightmare joining this morning. Sorry about that, everyone. I just couldn't access it. And morning, Chair. I don't think we've met. Nice to meet you.
No, very nice to meet you too, Debbie. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, I was so late. Yeah, no, I've got nothing to add. I was just curious about any possible penalties if we couldn't pool in any of the other investment that we've got, and presumably that would be the feedback you'd give around maybe any extensions to that time frame to incorporate any potential penalties, because it could be quite significant, couldn't it, on 30% of investment? So I was just curious about that, but I appreciate it's all very early days. So
Yeah, we'll need to get the detail on that. If they're giving us this deadline, what happens if you don't meet it?
yeah, exactly.
That's things we'll need clarifying as well. So yeah, I'll work with industry and our advisors obviously to try and pull together a response. I'll get it circulated and then you can comment accordingly. So
yeah, we'll be moving forward with other LGPS funds in the pool on this, of course, and I expect if some things are not possible to pool, there'll be probably a comply or justify type of scenario at some point in time in response to Debbie's point, and I'm sure with things like illiquid private assets, it will be possible to justify, and other LGPS funds such as the Clwyd Fund have got a lot more private assets than us, so we're not unique in having to justify those down the line, perhaps.
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah. Okay. I shall carry on then, if that's okay.
Sure.
So next update, and I think David's got a comment on this one as well, but essentially I've been talking about McLeod to board and committee for some time now, and this is essentially a retrospective data exercise that we have to do just to check that scheme members who are in scope, when they moved across to the career average scheme from the final salary scheme, they're no worse off for having done that. But the complication is to be able to operate the scheme under the final salary arrangements, you need to have hours and pay information in for those lines, particularly part-time workers. But once the scheme moved to the career average scheme in 2014, the LGPS decided, you know what, we don't need to keep hours anymore because it's not worked out like that. So this remedy has come along and said, actually, oh, by the way, you do need now to put that information in. So we've now got to go back and retrospectively input this hour and pay information into the people in scope. So it's not just the LGPS going through this. There's other pensions arrangements as well. So it's all well and good doing it locally, but if somebody's brought a transfer in from another public sector scheme or another LGPS fund, for example, they've almost got to go back and redo it before and redo the transfer in case it changes. So there's all this historic and sort of cross information gathering exercise going on. So what the LGA have done to try and make that a little bit easier for everybody is they've designed some paperwork, some forms that we ask the members to fill out, essentially just a history saying, look, tell us where you were before, so that if we need to get in touch with these previous providers, we can do that. So they've essentially outlined two scenarios of where this form might be used. And I spoke to the admin manager, and they've said primarily we're going to be taking option 2. But should the need arise, we're going to go and take the appropriate approach, essentially. So I think the idea is that we're going to try and capture as much evidence and data as we can, having had our fingers burnt by not doing it as part of this exercise previously when it came to changing the scheme to the final salary, from the final salary scheme to the career average scheme. So we will be writing to our scheme members in scope and saying, look, can you just tell us about your previous pension rights? And I think that's what David's question was around. He wanted to know if that was in line with the other administering authorities' approach as chair, I think. So the answer is basically yes.
Yeah.
I think we're all going to try and do what we think is the appropriate thing to try and get the information for any gaps, because there will be gaps. But we're essentially going to focus on option 2. But should we need to do something different, we'll do it, basically. And it's just an information gathering exercise. Just wanted to update board on that one. An important one for board to be interested in is the pension regulator scheme return. Every year we submit a return to the pension regulator, which has details of board members, actually. So pension regulator needs it and keeps a record of who's sat on pension boards around the LGPS. So we have now just submitted our return to TPR on the 11th of November, which was ahead of the 22nd deadline, something like that, I think it was. So we've submitted our return. So in terms of the board reassurances, I can confirm that that has now gone and been sent. So that can be a tick in the board's box. Within this report, it has things like number of employers, the quality of our data. And I don't know if you saw earlier on as I was scrolling through the minutes, we talked about data quality. We did the data quality testing. Those scores went into this return, for example. So just to give board some reassurance that we've sent the TPR return off. 3.3 is talking about the pensions increase. So for payroll providers and for scheme member representatives who'd be interested in this item, probably. The way that pension increase is applied within the LGPS is looking at the CPI value at the end of September, the previous September. So when we apply pensions increase in April, it's usually historically based on the CPI value at the end of September, the previous September. So in this case, it was 1.7%. So whilst we still await confirmation, that's what it will be. In previous years, it has been based on that information. So we're expecting the pension increase to be 1.7%. However, I can't say for definite until we get the confirmation through to tell us that's what it's going to be.
In recent years, that CPI has been, speaking as a pension recipient, has been pretty good in terms of
down.
The pensions have increased slightly more than pay has in the same time, but I think this year might be about turn, and 1.7 just falls at that time. Inflation may increase again by the time April comes around, but it is, as Chris said, usually the September figure which is used, which there's a lag, and it can be good or bad for recipients of pensions.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. McLeod, we've touched upon. I'm not going to go into any more detail. Basically, we're working on it. It's an ongoing project, and there's a lot of work going on. We are trying to find ways to try and make the process as streamlined as it can be, and we think they've come up with something which we're going to do some testing of, and if it works, I'll update board next time. But it's to do with inputting these service history lines onto the member records. We think we might have found a way to try and speed that up a little bit, which will help. In terms of assurances for board around McLeod, though, every new calculation that goes out the door has the McLeod test applied to it. So when the team are now paying benefits or calculating deferred benefits, transfers, anything like that, they are working through the McLeod process. Well, because it makes sense. You've got to do it at some point, so they do it at the point of paying it now. Otherwise, they just have to revisit it later anyway. So every calculation that's performed now on an ongoing basis is done via the McLeod remedy. It's the historic cases where we've already calculated retirement benefits that we have to revisit and recalculate, basically. So that's what we're focusing on at this point in time. Pension dashboards, work is still ongoing with those. Our go live date is October 2025, so around about 12 months time. I've got a meeting with the software providers in the next, I think I'm going to say month It might be more soon than that, but we've had a high level data cleanse from them before, and the data's in a really good place essentially. We weren't overly concerned at all, but that was probably about 12 months, maybe slightly more ago. So having an up-to-date conversation with them about data quality and data assessments, just so make sure our data is in a good place for when it goes live. The complications with dashboards is we don't know the impact it might have or not have on the team. It's never been done before. It's brand new. So we're not sure of what kind of scale of impact it might have in terms of pension savers accessing it and using it in queries, etc. So it's a bit of an unknown, but all we can do is make sure our data is prepared for it. And the dashboard toolkit is just some tools that have been released to help us with that. 4.2, it's all about data quality. The pension regulator have been in touch again to help us get prepared for pension dashboards. We've had some communications about those and we're considering them accordingly. I haven't really had the time to get into the detail of them yet, but it's on my list of things to do. But as I said, we're in a pretty good place when it comes to data quality. So I'm sure it'll just be a formality of working through what their expectations are. 5 is board membership. Obviously, you'll be aware we've got a couple of vacancies on the board. So it's on my work program to look to try and fill those vacancies. We've got one on the scheme member side and one on the employer side, just to try and build some resilience in to the board so that we can make sure we're as quorate as we can be when it comes to these sorts of meetings. So I'm looking to try and pick that one up in the next few weeks. I've got some ideas in terms of how we might be able to fill those vacancies, because it is difficult, because as you know, it takes up your time and whatnot. So it's trying to get people to give up some time is a challenge we've come up against a few times. So I'll keep you posted on that one. I'm expected to pick it up in the next few weeks. And that was it, Chair. It's quite a lot in it. I could have gone on for a bit longer, I think, to be honest, but hopefully that's given board the assurances they need when it comes to what's going on.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. The only other one I think I'll mention, which I mean, as you say, where you go on this, there's so much to discuss at the moment that but I think the ongoing consultation from the government also includes the good governance review, which has been ongoing for several years, but they're pushing ahead with that as part of the same consultation or the same timescale. It's a different strand of the current consultation. That will hopefully give us a framework going forward as to what's required, and that's surely going to include such things as board members we're legally required to have training, etc. But in terms of the legislation, committee members don't have to at the moment. It's so they'll the good governance will surely bring those type of things into line, which have been bubbling under for a long time, and they'll probably be formalised in the good governance regime.
Yes. It's looking to formalise quite a few things, like having a specific named officer, lead officer for the LGPS, for example, those sorts of things. That will be written down, and the responsibility for running the fund will sit with that person. So there's all sorts that are going to come out of the good governance, and that was one of the strands of thinking behind Aon's review when they came in the summer. Actually, was around the good governance framework, and part of the supporting reason as to why they made their recommendation. So yeah, but thank you for picking that up, Chair. I wrote this paper before the Mansion House speech, so I didn't know that good governance part was going to be in that actually. So thank you for bringing that out.
Yeah. So as we said, so much happening just in the last few days. Yeah. So I look at that good governance as a positive now. You know, there were times when we looked at it as a threat because they were going to implement separation from the council, etc. But I think they've got lots of good stuff lined up in there now, which will be challenging in terms of resource to carry all that out. But I think it will put us in a good place in terms of governance eventually.
It's coming from the right place. It really is. As you say, it does have impacts on us in terms of what we're expected to do. A lot more scrutiny, and that's on myself and the board as well in terms of what you need to make sure you've got your eye on the ball, those sorts of things. But it is coming from the right place to make sure the LGPS is run consistently. I think the issue that we've had is that some funds are better at it than others. So this good governance framework is designed to try and pull those are perhaps maybe a little bit further behind for whatever reason, all up to the same standard. So I think it's doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Unless Debbie and Graham have got something to add on the legislation, we'll note the contents as paragraph 6 suggests. A lot of what we've just discussed is a good segue into the next item on the risk register, of course. I think what we mentioned just a few minutes ago, that the challenge of changes to pooling and being fully pooled probably needs adding to the investment pillar of the risk register. It's something which, as we said, this was just coming from a speech last Thursday night, so we certainly don't expect it to be a finished article now, Chris. But between now and the next investment committee, perhaps we can put something together as just to identify the risk in the register, not the entire action that we'll need to take to deliver it, but just
Acknowledging the risk, isn't it? Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think we could do that. So I suppose the logical approach is that I go away and put something together and share it with the board to make sure you're happy with the wording of it. The next committee meeting is, I think, the 13th of December. So we have about 3.5, 4 weeks, or 3 weeks probably by the time we produce the papers to get the wording finalised. But I think it's doable if it's just an additional risk.
I think yeah, it's not absolutely necessary to do it by that 3-week deadline either, because it's still a consultation document, isn't it? So
fair enough. Yeah.
I'll leave the timescale with you, Chris, to
Okay. Yeah.
whatever's most appropriate, and I'm sure you'll be moving forward with your colleagues at other funds and WPP to move that forward. So we won't put that strict deadline on it.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, noting you're ducking out for a while, Graham.
Thanks, Greg.
And
Yeah, I'll rejoin very shortly. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. So shall we go through the risks?
I think so. I think it's the first time you'll have seen them as part of the formal meeting, Chair. So yeah, I think it makes sense.
And the first one is quite what you'd expect to have in there, really.
Yeah.
And
What happens if we don't hit our investment objectives, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So happy with that one myself.
I think so. Happy with the scores. It's pretty significant if we don't get it right. So 9 and a 4.
Yeah.
I think it feels appropriate. Yeah.
Long-term investment strategy. Yeah. Again, fair enough. And it will be considered, as we said, in the first quarter of next year.
Yes, and I think when you raised the question, or when the question came up at the investment committee, I think Aon representative said we'll work alongside the actuary to make sure it all happens and comes together, really, because it does have such an impact. It's intertwined, isn't it? So yeah, that's fine.
I think the formal, while we might plan the asset allocation in the early next year, the investment strategy is a document which comes out after the
Yes.
valuation, I think.
Yeah.
As a formal document, so it's more of a longer term, perhaps, than I was suggesting in terms of the responding to that, perhaps. Yeah. Yep, happy with that. I think on this one, I'm happy that it's well controlled with several levels now. It's not just us. It's well, not just you, Chris. It's and the committee. It's WPP and with things like listed equities. It'll be Russell Investments going forward for the global growth as well now, isn't it? So
there's lots of eyes that look at performance. We've got our investment consultants, so locally, we've got Joint Governance Committee, Russell, as you say, there's 3 or 4 sets of eyes looking at this, isn't there now? So
Yeah, and Russell being the most operational of those, they will adjust or change managers as necessary. They'll be forward scanning their performance very closely on that, and presumably the same applies to the allocators on other asset classes going forward as well. The Schroders type role and
yeah. And ultimately, the pool also have the oversight advisor in place as well to try and help with these sorts of issues as well. So yeah.
It's quite a matrix really when you think of that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
if you go back 30 years, it was probably just an officer and an advisor scratching their heads and thinking, but yeah, it's improved.
Yeah. Okay, so this is talking about deficits and deficit recovery periods, essentially. I think it's right to address it because some of our employers are in a deficit position. So the fact it's identified as a risk is a good thing, and the fact that the risk acknowledges that it's over a period. Now the fund does have a recovery period, and it is considered at each valuation. And in fact, over the last few valuations, it's been coming in as you'd expect it to. As you move on 3 years between the valuation, you'd expect the recovery period to come in as well. So it has been reduced, and I expect we'll have to wait and see what the valuation results are. But if they follow the trend of the recent years, it might come in again. And what that's doing is that's reducing the risk on the fund. Because if you're recovering a deficit over a shorter period, it's better than recovering over a longer period. So it is a risk, and that's what this risk is trying to identify.
Do you recall the history of such recovery periods, Chris? I think in funds I've been associated with, there used to be a sort of rolling recovery period of 20 years, and each valuation it moved forward to 3 years. So it was still 20 years recovery period, but it was a different 20 years to the one previous.
That has been historically the case, but over recent years we have been pulling it in.
Yeah,
just because it gives us that flexibility for when things don't go quite so well, you can just tweak it again a little bit. So I can't remember the exact period. I'd have to just refresh myself, but it's certainly come down. It's less than 20 years. It's if it's not in the low teens, it's just in the double digits, 11, 12 years perhaps. So
I think that'll be an interesting conversation, perhaps in the valuation review.
yes, in the training, yeah.
We can press on it to suggest if there is a, because I'm not entirely convinced. I think every fund nearly were pushed to reduce those recovery periods by the GAD, is it Section 13 reviews?
Yes. Yeah.
And they gave funds red flags if they weren't reducing that period at one point, which I disagreed with on a point of principle, really. But still, it was easier to comply than try and justify otherwise.
Yeah, from my experience, I think they have relaxed that a little bit, but it will raise a flag now. For example, if somebody or a fund increases a contribution rate for an employer, for example, but pushes out the recovery period as well, there's almost like two things happening. That would be like, hang on, this is outside the norm. That's probably where they'd raise a flag now. So whether they've just relaxed that a little bit, but we've never had any red flags at the Powys level, thankfully. And in fact, we were used as an example within the last Section 13 review. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it does reference the Powys fund within there and the fact that A&R actually in the process they went through. So a bit of light reading for somebody if they're interested, but we are in the actual latest Section 13 report as well.
Yeah, it's good news that we haven't been flagged in the past. It's not a comfortable position to be flagged there.
No, I've not to have that conversation, thankfully. Okay, so are we okay to move on? Number 5 then?
Yeah.
Which is permitting contribution rate changes to be introduced by annual steps down as well as up rather than immediately. So what this one is doing is this is giving or acknowledging the fact that when a contribution rate changes, so for example, let's give an example where the valuation doesn't go so well. So 100% funded now. If at the next valuation we were 95% funded, that can have an impact on the employer contribution rate. which means it might go up. But rather than the fund taking the approach to say, okay, well, we're going to increase your contribution rate by 3% this year, it allows us to step up to that 3% over time to help the employer manage that transition up to the higher rate. And conversely, it can work the other way as well. If the evaluation went really well and it turned out we're 120% funded, the reality is we could actually probably cut employer contributions, but rather than jumping straight down to that lower contribution rate, we should take a stepped approach down to it to help the funder manage the risk as well, because the next valuation in 3 years might not be so good. So it's just acknowledging that whilst we're doing that, there is a risk attached to it, but this is a process to try and help us manage that risk. That's the context.
I agree with that practice, Chris. In my previous fund, we didn't step them when we were going down, because it would helped employers immediately in times of budget constraints. But I presume it might be useful for that, from the fund's perspective, for that to happen sometimes because of cash flow. If
risk appetite as well.
yeah.
We're a smaller fund than perhaps the one you used to be with, David. So we can't afford to take perhaps as much risk as some of the bigger funds.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons behind this thinking as well, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's again a conversation in the valuation.
Yep. 6 is looking at, well, we've been through this recently, inflation and pay being more than anticipated. Obviously, with it being a benefit scheme linked to pay, when pay goes up, it can have a negative effect on the funding position. Your liabilities go up alongside that. So it's the shock that the fund can go through when inflation's high. We've just seen it. Obviously, inflation has been very high over recent years, but at the last valuation, we built in a buffer around inflation to try and help us manage that period of high inflation, knowing that it was likely to be short term and it's coming down. And we just talked about inflation and the figure being 1.7%. So we're coming out the other side of that now. But it's right, it is a risk. Anything that increases your liabilities can have a significant risk on the fund. So that's what this risk is identifying.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if it's as much as 9 in terms of inflation, but I'm happy to accept it as certainly a risk, and the text around it is quite correct.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So this next one is talking about the insolvency of an investment manager who's investing on our behalf. And it is a risk. Obviously, if an investment manager disappears, then it does place a risk on the fund. We've seen something recently, actually, in regard to one of our managers, where we've had to make a redemption request because the fund that was invested in is not being disinvested, but that was one of the options on the table. So we saw that other redemptions were being made, and the investment consultants advised that we do the same thing. So it's having a process in place to be able to act quickly and swiftly, which we did. And we have got that process in place when it comes to scheme of delegation. But this risk is just talking about acknowledging there's a risk that investment managers can disappear over time, and what do we do with it and the impact.
Is it somewhere else there, Chris, or is it here that perhaps we should refer as well to the Waystone, Russell, the pool oversight, not oversight, that's Hyman's, isn't it? But the pool overview managers, I suppose they still come into investment managers, perhaps in the loose definition.
Yes, I guess perhaps they do. Yeah, but are you thinking in terms of maybe putting it in as a control, having the fact we've got that?
I think it's both sides really. That one, they're
True,
also they could face.
Yes, you're right. I don't think we cover that anywhere else, actually. No, we don't. So that could be one to consider, actually. What number was it? Here, wasn't it? Invest 7. Yes, you're right. Because, for example, if Russell Investments, who are an investment manager, their circumstances changed, obviously that would have a risk on the WPP and the fund.
Yeah, they're more of an allocator than a manager, so it may
Yeah.
be sufficient just to add in investment managers or fund allocators to the wording there, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. I'll consider that one.
And as you say, it does happen with some of the asset managers, particularly historically with real estate, with property funds. Sometimes there's a run on them, and the redemption queue, and it's usually that everyone's a bit too late to get in the queue, and there's too many in the queue. But
I think that's an appropriate example. Yeah.
it's certainly a risk which needs to be covered there.
Okay. Talking about literally what we've been talking about pension consolidation, I wonder whether it could actually come under this risk here, which is talking about pooling. Whether we could just flesh this one out a little bit, flesh the risk out a little bit to be more than just pooling it, because it could be consolidation. It depends whether we want it as a separate risk. Maybe it should be its own risk. Yeah.
Again, I'm happy for you to take the
Mm.
issue away and think where it comes in, but it probably needs to be updated to include the current conversation.
Yeah.
That heading is broad enough to include it.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. But I guess we could put it in this middle column here, potential consequence. I don't know. Yeah, perhaps leave that with me. I'll consider it appropriate and share. Yeah.
I
There's
think,
lots of
perhaps we need to include both strands in terms of the risk to the pool having to merge and the risk of us having to hurry to be pooled, to include both them in there somehow.
Yeah, yeah. I'll think of some wording, because obviously with the 2 points we've identified are the structure of the pool, the FCA discussion we had, but also any timescales that are placed on pooling as well.
Perhaps it's worth just as it's still has consultation status. It'd be better just to put a line in separate for the implications of the current consultation.
Yeah.
Rather than rewording all of this particular risk, or it might change after the consultation.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So perhaps it's best just to put a new line in for changes to the structure of pooling or something.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. I think I'll probably do something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Happy to discuss that offline with you, Chris.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. That'll be helpful. Okay. If we move on then, Investor 9 is talking about the MiFID II professional status. Making sure
that sounds the score on that, the 12, the uncontrolled score is very high. I think moved on to a degree. This MiFID was very much happening about 3 or 4 years ago.
I think it comes back to the concern the previous chair had around if we lost the professional status, then it means we wouldn't be able to invest in all sorts of the products that we have available to us. And the consequence of that is pretty significant. But the likelihood of that happening, to be honest, is very, very slim. I think it's fair to say. Yeah, we've moved on from it.
Still, for the council, I think there was more of a risk than the pension fund.
Yeah, I mean, we could suggest that we take it off on committee and see what our committee feel about it. But it's certainly some time ago now, and I think we've got everything in place to be able to make sure we're on top of it.
It may be something we can maybe archive that one or something.
Yes, you can. I think part of the risk register system, you can do that. So yeah, I'll consider that one.
Yeah, it's hardly likely to bite us now, is it?
No, I don't think so.
As a pension fund, I know that not all local authorities have pension funds, of course, and
True. Yeah.
there's more investment expertise in authorities which do have pension funds generally.
Yeah.
And they have less difficulty achieving the professional status as an authority as well as a council fund.
Yeah.
While certainly some small local authorities decide not to go for that professional status.
True. Yeah.
So I think it's one which is blurring across pension fund and council, that one a little bit.
Yes, perhaps.
But
Yeah.
in the context of the council, it may still be a more of a risk, but in the context of the pension fund, I think it's one we can archive.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. So I'll make that recommendation to committee the next one. Investor 10 is quite specific. Falling return on government bonds. It's to do with the approach and the risk sitting behind the fund's approach to investment. It's quite specific, to be fair. It's quite a long-standing one. Wondering whether we should maybe just reconsider that.
I suppose it's a subset of the very first risk in the list. Was that?
Yes, it is. You're right, it is. Yeah.
So I'm just being cautious of having in mind the Liz Truss scenario of a few years ago.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Consider that
I
one.
think people have learned from that debacle, and it's probably as a subset of the first one again, could be archived, perhaps.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. And the next one, the final one, is the responsible investment climate change risk. I think it needs to be on there, rightly so. And it's making sure that committee have the appropriate tools and information available to them to be able to make informed decisions, but also the risk attached to stranded assets potentially and assets at risk of climate change. So
yeah, I agree. Definitely needs to be there, and perhaps a lot of what's written there is about the climate change aspect.
Yeah.
But there are other aspects, such as we talked about, the sort of social and governance aspects in terms of what's happening in the Middle East we referred to earlier, which might be challenged by electors and scheme members. I'm not sure if the other aspects of the S and the G are fully covered.
Captured. No, I think you're right. I'll tweak the wording. Yeah.
But the environmental aspect has been the driving force for this in
Yes,
all
it
of
has.
us. So that's where we've focused on.
I think we can update it. Yeah, I think so. That was the final one.
Yeah, so a couple of suggestions there, not too many, but
A couple of rewordings, and I'll recirculate with board as well, so we can formalise some wording, and then it can go to committee then for formal approval.
yeah, good.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I hope Rachel's made a note of our conversation through that, because
Yeah, I've got some notes as well. So if any problems, Rachel, give me a shout, and hopefully we can make it make sense. Thanks.
marvellous. Okay, everyone happy to move on?
If it's okay with you, Chair, do you mind if I just take 2 minutes?
Yeah, shall we?
That's okay.
2 minutes for coffee or whatever, and it's now 11:21. Shall we get back by? Shall we say 11:30 and
Or 25, Chair, really. So whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Your kettle boils faster than mine, Chris.
Yes, it does. Yes.
See you in.
Yes, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we're live, and the rest of these items are for information, so we should run through them pretty sharpish. Over to you again, Chris, with the WPP update.
Thank you, Chair. Again, committee apologies. Board should be familiar with this. This is just the quarterly paper that I produce off the back of what the WPP share with us for dissemination out to our committees and boards. So the usual reports are in there. I'm not going to go through them line by line because they are WPP documents, and and not mine or for the funds. So they're just there for your information, really. We have included for the first time in item 2.2, which is a responsible investment update provided by the pool's oversight advisor. Again, there for information because it's got some information about 3 of the funds that Powys fund invest into. So just for your information, there's lots of information within there about what the WPP is doing in terms of responsible investment at the sub-fund level. So I wasn't going to go into any more detail than that, Chair, but obviously I'm happy if you've got any points you want to go through or discuss or anything, then please do let me know. But it's for your information for you to be able to read.
Yeah, indeed. Lots of pages there, but I think most of it we are familiar with, as you say, Chris. And lots of it is unchanged, really, but quite a bit of detail there in terms of the sub-funds which are on screen now, which is useful.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the useful one as well, actually, is the first page after the report, which is a summary of the actual meeting. So what the Joint Governance Committee discussed at the last meeting there. So it's that JGC update on page 35 onwards. That gives board some more understanding of what the Joint Governance Committee discusses at their meetings. So it's just there for information.
And those percentage funded figures were what we discussed a moment ago, Chris, with
Yes.
So those are in the public domain already.
Yeah.
And you can see that the percentages, there's a herd of us around 70-80%, and then with Powys, around there, and Clwyd being the outlier really in that respect, with all their private assets.
Yeah.
And I think that's to a degree what's driven the government's making us comply with pooling, really. It's true of several other funds, many London boroughs as well, really, are down there in the low 10s and 20s.
Yep. So they got some challenges ahead of them when it comes to any deadlines imposed, as we discussed earlier.
There'll be other people scrabbling around. So
yes, that was it for me on that item, Chair. Obviously, I'm happy to pick up any questions.
I think the performance hasn't been brilliant the last year or so, with the managers being just a tad below benchmark or expectation.
Yes.
Of outperforming the benchmark at least.
Correct. Yeah.
But the action is being taken in terms of the certainly most so in terms of the Global Growth Fund in which we invested.
Yeah.
With the change to some of the asset managers and change of allocation percentages to some of the others.
Yeah, again, and that provides, again, it should provide some reassurances to board and local committees as well that where it's identified that maybe things aren't going as well as they can, the WPP and Russell have the scrutiny over these sorts of items, which and then we can act accordingly. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Fine as far as I'm concerned. We'll note for information, and unless anybody else has got a question, we'll move on. Chris.
Thank you very much. This one should be a very quick one. This again, this is just presented for information. There's no updates at all in terms of what I can tell the board on this one. There's no outstanding IDRP cases. We've just gone through audit process with Wales Audit Office, who are awaiting their outcome, and there's been no new breaches added to the breaches register. So in terms of the standing items, nothing to add, I'm afraid. Well, should be pleased.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, no news, and thanks for that. And it's good to just note that as we move forward. So yeah, thank you. And
breaches register, and I think we move into the confidential session then.
We do. So we have to consider the press being excluded, as some of the information may relate to financial or business affairs of a particular person or organisation. Can I have someone to propose that we go?
Thank you, Chair. I propose.
Thank you, Debbie, and I'll second that, and we'll Rachel, if you can go into the part 2 of the agenda.
Just bear with me, Chair.